And most of those pitfalls come from actually what Jen was saying earlier, not doing the work first. If you don't have this all in place when you're organising and creating your brand, then you probably don't know who you're speaking to. So then there'll be a lack of consistent messaging because you don't really know what your story is and it's too confusing. So then your messaging to those people won't be consistent. It won't look authentic, and you're probably sort of going to overlook what your audience needs are because you don't really understand what you're doing it for in the first place.
My name is Sian Horn. I am the founder of Elite Pilates, the Club Women's Network, a national network for women that work for themselves. I also create content.
My name is Judie Russell. I teach people how to make videos through the Vid Academy, and sometimes I make videos.
My name is Jen, and I am the co-founder of a digital marketing agency called Velocity Growth.
My name is Jay Woodard. I am the founder and creative director of Ad32. We create content for SMEs, corporates, all different kind of products, food, fashion, all that kind of stuff. So it's between photo and video.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 35 of Unbranded. And today we're going to talk about storytelling for businesses, why it's important, kind of the main things to do when you're trying to tell stories, and how businesses can use stories to engage their audience. We'll also look at maybe pitfalls that happen in storytelling and how to avoid them, and, you know, different things that we've seen, different companies we've seen using storytelling. So I'm going to start off with something that I found really interesting in the research for this. These two guys were doing an experiment, and they bought 200 items from eBay with an average cost of, I think it was $1.25 per item, right? And then they went off and got writers to write stories about each of those items, reposted them on eBay with these fictional stories. And their total spend was €250 when they bought all the items. And they got €8,000 when they sold all the items, just because the stories were attached. So I found that really, really cool. And it just goes to show how storytelling can increase the perceived value of a product, even though the stories were fictional. But anyway, I'm going to go to you guys and ask you, why do you think storytelling is important in business? And I will start with you first, please, Jen.
Well, it's an age-old part of human behavior and psychology. I mean, it's just everything. To bring context to anything, you have to bring a narrative with it. It's why, be it everything from like psychology right through the marketing funnel, everything has to be kind of aligned to a story base, whether that's feeding into the particular emotion that you need to convey. And that's where you hear all of this kind of, don't talk about the features, talk about, bring the story to life. And Apple are the age-old case study of doing a great job of this compared to Microsoft. But that's what it just comes back to. It's the plain and simple human psychology. It's the best way to resonate with anyone. And, humans have been studied to do it for thousands of years.
Exactly. And I suppose, Jay, do you think, especially in our industry, I find that a lot of people are I don't know, they're not using storytelling wrong, but everyone's throwing around the word storytelling, maybe without having a concrete structure of what that needs to be. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also think people don't feel like it's worth the time to kind of tell the story of a brand, or the story, let's just start selling. Let's just get cash in the door. What are we doing? Why are you telling me a backstory? Tell me about the product. And the foundations of that product are built through story. The likes of, there's a reason we pay €70 for a Nike jumper and €12 for a Pennies or whatever brand. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. There's a difference there. Obviously, there's some texture differences, but the main thing is that tick. It's the just do it. So people resonate with stories. I remember Jameson did a whole campaign they did 3 45-minute episode podcasts of their story, of how Jameson started way back when and built all that brand up. I think we talked about that on the podcast course we did, Shan, years ago. But that was how they felt they'd get their story across to people who wanted to hear it. It's just, you have to build that foundation before anyone will buy off you. Because yes, we click on those quick ads and it's a €3 purchase on Instagram, or those silly things that we buy, but you're not spending more than €20 on a product if you don't know somewhat of the story of that product, I think, personally anyway.
Yeah, totally. And Shan, I think that you are an expert storyteller, a modern Shanachie. I think that's what I've seen you speak to businesses at parties, for example, and you're drawing their story out of them. I see you do it a lot, actually, and trying to help them almost sometimes I've seen you do is help them to see their story in a different light to give them a bit of motivation. So why do you think storytelling is so important for business?
Because there's no connection without the story, and Jen said it earlier, emotions are really important and how people feel. And the only way to get an emotional connection is to understand why something has happened. And actually, you said earlier about people using it wrong, and you started the pod with exactly what you can do wrong, and that's make this shit up, because there's no connection there. They did very well in an experiment, etc. But for a really strong brand, there's always a why, and there's always a lovely story behind it. And I think we forget why we started sometimes. And so, yeah, a lot of my job is to take people back to that, because you'd be amazed at what you find out.
And like, I do think that is what a lot of good coaches do as well, though, because I find that sometimes when we get stuck in business, we're telling ourselves the wrong story in our head. And sometimes it takes someone else to pull it out of you and you go, oh yeah, that's why I'm doing this. Or and then you always have to re-identify or reevaluate your story or something and go back to it in a new way. When I'm doing workshops, my icebreaker, how I start people out is, instead of saying, tell me something about yourself, or, I don't know, something like that. What I do is I use the story spine. It's this thing that Pixar used to come up with their movie ideas. And the writers actually sit around the writer's room with this story spine template. And that's how they came up with Toy Story. And it starts with, once upon a time there was, every day, because of that, until finally, and ever since then. And I think it's one of the most wonderful templates. And I do it with all businesses that I work with as well, because sometimes it draws things out of them that, they might not even realize is there. But what do you think, Jay, are like core elements of a good story? Or what would you kind of help your clients to kind of help them to tell their story in a more engaging way?
For me, I think you always have to base your marketing and your kind of storytelling on the 4 pillars of what hold up your company or your product, your business, whatever it is. Like, so it's your staff, your product, your community, and whatever else, your brand, whatever it be. So like, it could be whatever charity work you're involved, all kind of stuff. I think those are the 4 things you can base it off and build off. And I think once you stick to those 4, even for your marketing, for social posts, if you're building off your pillars, you're kind of doing a consistent story throughout. I think that's how I do it with my clients. That's how I build videos and like storylines for my clients. Is, what are we basing this off? Why are we doing this? What is this video about? Is it to do with our 4 pillars? It's to do with our brand and our community, right? What's happening? There is a charity run happening. We're sponsoring it. Perfect. That connects. That all circles together, and then we can loop it all back in.
Yeah. Totally, yeah. And like I actually feel like a bit of a robot today, lads, because I am coming off a vomiting bug, and I'm basically just like, everything I'm doing is going through the motions today. So I'm void of personality. I'm like, so next, Jen, tell me, what do you do with your clients to help them tell more engaging stories?
Sorry, he's just kind of come out of nowhere.
Freddie has joined Jen on the couch. Freddie is Jen's dog, just for those who can't see this.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the factor fiction piece, because sometimes when a client just has an extremely boring story, sometimes fiction can help elevate it a touch without necessarily going overboard. But actually, do you know what? Before I dive into this, I actually wouldn't be the absolute best at this for any stretch of the imagination. And I actually recently referred a client over to Judie for this, and I got a phone call out while I was actually walking Fred, the dog, the other day, and she was raving about you.
Nice.
She was like, I just hadn't thought about my story in so long, like the roots of it, where it all came from. It's put so much back into perspective. For context, Judie is like doing an anniversary video for them for a length of time that they've been open a business. And I just thought the structure that you use is something that I just want to steal, as opposed to actually reflecting back on anything I've done before. Because for me, normally by the time someone gets to me, they have to tell me that story, and then I have to structure it into marketing material effectively. Normally by the time someone comes to me, like if someone comes to me and they don't have that, then they're typically not the right fit for me. Like I'm just one step after that kind of story pieces kind of come together a bit. Yes, part of my role is to kind of put that in front of people effectively, but the actual structure of the story, if people haven't done that brand work, and I think that's what brand work should be, as opposed to like, here's my favorite font, then that's where it gets messy for me in particular. But yeah, Judie, kudos to that, because I just thought it was really good. When a client picks up the phone and like raves about someone you've referred, it's always a good sign.
I know. And when the opposite happens, you just want the world to swallow you up. And so I'm really happy to hear that. Good. Sian, how do you try to kind of pull stories or help your clients to tell their stories in an engaging way?
I think, well, I use the Pixar a lot, actually, Judie, because actually when you're doing talks as well, that Pixar format is perfect. And the 7 stages. So I always give that to people as well. I think it's spot on. So anybody can Google that. It's there. Anybody can use it. For me, I don't think the fiction piece comes in. I think people are really tough on themselves. And often when they're talking about their story, they're like, I'll leave that bit out because that bit's boring. Because we're awful to ourselves. And I'm always like, hang on, something's missing there. You just skipped a piece. What happened in the middle there? And they're like, oh, well, that was just boring. We would like doing this. And then we found out this and that took us in this direction. I'm like, okay, well, I think this is really exciting. So I think don't leave anything out. Like I would rather the biggest story that you have to tell and then cut it down than the opposite. And I think you can use your story. And actually, I talked about this on my social this morning, weirdly enough, because I was talking about podcasting. And actually, Jay, what you mentioned about Jameson telling their story in a pod, I think that's like super, super important. So some people think podcasts are always like, like what we do here every week, etc. But sometimes it is literally just a storytelling piece. And often I think that works for 2 things. I think your customers then get to know you much better, but also as well, when you're creating a team of people underneath you, like when someone comes for an interview with me, the first thing I ask is, why us? Tell me what in our story made you want to come and work for us? Because if you Google my businesses, there will be lots of storytelling there. And so if they don't know anything or why they want to work for me, they're possibly not the right person. So I think there's power in the story, not just for your customer, but obviously for people that you want to join your team as well.
And I'll stick with you there, Sian, because I think it leads into, have you seen like pitfalls or things that people do when they're telling stories that should be avoided outside of the making stuff up from scratch?
Yeah. And most of those pitfalls come from actually what Jane was saying earlier, not doing the work first. If you don't have this all in place when you're organising and creating your brand, then you probably don't know who you're speaking to. So then there'll be a lack of consistent messaging because you don't really know what your story is and it's too confusing. So then your messaging to those people won't be consistent. It won't look authentic. And you're probably sort of going to overlook what your audience needs are because you don't really understand what you're doing it for in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And like, I suppose olden days, Jen, storytelling would be sitting around the fire and kind of like passing on a lot of information from different tribes and stories. And I love Irish storytelling as well. But nowadays you have like 30 seconds to get like what some would call a story. But I suppose originally it would have been like setup, conflict, resolution. Now you've got hook, problem, solution. Do you think that there's enough time?
It's the same, isn't it? The two
Do you think so?
Yeah.
And do you think that time doesn't matter?
Time doesn't matter. It's not going to come to me now. I know it, but there is that. There's a story somewhere where it's just the 6-word story or something like that. Google the 1-sentence story. Like Google it. It's actually very good. It's kind of almost like a riddle. But yeah, that it just whether you have a riddle or whether you have a haiku or whatever the case might be, whatever structure or format you use doesn't necessarily make any difference. The structure, size, format, length, it still comes down to the same formatting, the setup, conflict, resolution, hook, problem, solution. Those are the same things, really. And when you do that well, it resonates. I mean, it's the same as like, Vibes and Scribes in Cork. They actually have a section in their store where they have wrapped books in brown paper, and they just write the first sentence of the book on the cover of the brown paper, and it's called Blind Date with a Book. And you pick it based off the first line, which is essentially the setup. So you're buying off the hook only, as opposed to the rest of the story, which is the mystery. But there's lots of different ways to do it. It doesn't matter whether you're making a 2-hour long YouTube video or a 15-second reel. I think that's what I hate most about a lot of reels at the moment, where it's like, read the caption. Fuck off.
What is it? TLDR?
Yeah.
Or is it too long to read?
Yeah.
And Jay, what do you think? Like, have you seen errors in storytelling, or does the duration make a difference?
It has to be like you have to catch first. Like the oldest books, Frankenstein, all these old books, they capture us in the first lines. Like there's books that I've picked up and I've read 2 chapters and I put it away because it hasn't caught me. And I think a lot of people don't do that enough. Like if the story's not catching, you can put the book down, you can turn the film off. Like there has to be a good story behind it. And for a brand, if you don't catch us, be it with value, with impressing us, with something just catching our attention, there's no point. I'm trying to think of some bad examples now, but I really can't, because I don't give it time enough to give it to stay in my mind. I literally just swipe off it, or I stop reading it, or I move on. Like, as obviously movies turned off. Like, we've all turned off a movie because it's not engaging enough, but there was millions spent on that movie to be made. That's bad business. That's bad business as it is. But I think just focus on trying to provide value, be it in the entertainment way, be it the knowledge way, or whatever it is. Like, I remember when I was writing copy for, I was doing a mail campaign a few years back, and we sent out this campaign near Christmas time. And again, we started the whole campaign. We wanted to get people in for memberships in for January and kind of give this free membership away and stuff. But we built this whole story and built this whole idea of like, oh, here's 2 free months, and no one cared, no one bit, nothing like that. But then I sat down and it's like, we have to change the wording. We have to capture that idea. And what way we flipped it around was, here's a present for you. Here's a 2-month free present from us to you. And there was like 140 signups. So it's just the way
What's that got to do with your story?
Because the idea is to capture them. The idea is like for that campaign, the story was there was nothing there. But the story of this campaign,
didn't have a story.
It didn't. And now we're like,
but
here's
wouldn't the story be if you took it to the Pixar, there would be a story? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Like, when we're talking about stories, sometimes we can look at campaigns and conversion, but actually the story might be, so for instance, I'll give you an example. So Elite Pilates, there was a story about why that business started. I'm buggered, bad knees, problems. I needed to do this for myself. That's how the business started. However, it doesn't work like a magic pill. So our sweet point is when somebody tries the business for twice a week for 4 weeks. At the end of that, I can almost guarantee 99% of the time, someone will feel an actual difference from their initial problem. And their problem would have been the same as mine, which was my story. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm connecting back to what the problem is that they're not feeling well. They're not feeling great. And if then I convert from that story, rather than it just being get 20% off and come in, it's back to problem and solution, I suppose. So I think campaigns don't always bring the story into it. And I think actually they could be more successful if they did sometimes.
I think they have great success with pulling parts of stories too, though, which is I suppose interesting in of itself, where it's like you can actually run a fantastic campaign with a great hook. You can run a fantastic campaign if you just slice a solution into a problem that's like, gut-wrenching for someone. And you can like take snippets of a story out of something else and bring it into your story, or that's the creative piece, I guess, as well. Like no story is really unique when you like come down to the nuts and bolts of it, but that is the beauty of the story, and also where everyone falls flat, because everyone recognizes that their own story isn't unique and feels that it's not valuable in the same breath. but it's actually the fact that it isn't unique that will allow other people to resonate with it. So, you know, my story might be, okay, it's unique to me, fair enough, but all of the different elements are not unique in of themselves. They've been brought together. They're experiences that multiple different people have also experienced. It's just in the order in which in which I would tell it would be different to someone else, but people can pluck out the different pieces. So I think that's one thing people kind of rise and fall on, where they have this story, but they just feel like it's the same as everyone else's, or what's different about me. And the beauty is that it's not. Otherwise, no one will resonate with it anyway.
Yeah. But the word that you're using all the time is story. And I think that's back to what we're discussing. It is important. And those pieces that you can take out of a story at different times will resonate with different people. But again, that's back to branding, getting that right, making sure that you know and you understand before, at the beginning of your business, and you don't think your brand is a logo or a font.
And this is so interesting because it is something that kind of like irks me. It's when, you know, people use storytelling out of context. And I was like, well, what is the context? And I was listening to podcasts last night on storytelling, TED Talks, best place to get storytelling advice and information. But it kind of went through the difference of storytelling for business and the narrative. So like storytelling is, you know, sharing stories to engage your audience, evoke emotions. And there's usually a clear beginning, middle and an end, and often characters, conflict, memorable messages and stuff like that. Then the narrative is the overarching structure or the stories that a business tells that's consistent and kind of runs through the brand identity, values and mission. So I was actually like I was annoyed about something that I didn't have the answer to. And through the research for this podcast, I feel like I'm actually more clear now on what the answer is. Does that kind of make sense to you as well?
Yeah.
We've cracked the code.
I think the story, like, so the actual storyline of the business, start to finish, whatever be, that will be the arc of the story. And then the actual day-to-day, the running is the narrative of the story. It's the actual heart of the story. Do you know what I mean? So like, yeah, it's a good code.
I thought so, yeah, because it was very confusing. Do you know, especially when large organizations like universities come and they're like, we want to tell our story. And I'm like, I don't know, do you? Do you know, I'm like, maybe that's it. Maybe you have like a beginning of the university conflict. Like, but how some businesses don't want to bring conflict in. They want to stay positive all the time. And actually, I think that we live in a world where people don't hold enough space for conflict and negative emotion. They're like, no, skip that part and just tell me the nice things. And I'm like, well, conflict is part of life. We just kind of have to sometimes, you know, listen to it and understand how people resolve, as opposed to positivity overload, you know.
Just speaking of TED Talks there, a few years ago, I saw Tim Urban speak at a conference, and I went back and I watched his TED Talk, and it is probably, it could well be the most viewed TED Talk ever. I actually don't know. It's definitely must be in the top 5 at least. But Tim Urban's procrastination video is a phenomenal piece of craftsmanship when it comes to storytelling. It's not very long. It's a few minutes long. It's not the longest TED Talk you'll watch by far, but you will feel highs, lows, sad, happy. But the way he sets the whole thing up, and you can really see that structure of the setup, the conflict and the resolution to it. And how he kind of animates the emotions throughout it. So for example, like he talks about procrastination and the kind of monkey on your back and like it's a whole thing, but well worth a watch. You will definitely thank me if you haven't watched it before. It is so good. Have you seen it, Jay?
No, I don't think I have. I have to watch it.
Yeah, we'll watch it when we go back out of here. It's really good.
Jen and Jay are in the same room today, and I don't know how they're managing to work this audibly, but it sounds brilliant. But you know what you touched on there, Jen? There was a study done by this professor in a university, I don't know, but he got people to listen to a story and he hooked her up to an MRI machine as she was telling the story, and then he got an audience to listen to the story and hooked them up to an MRI machine, and he proved that like the same parts of your brain light up when you're telling a story following that structure. Like you can actually synchronize your brain with other people. So like that's what I think a good story is. If you can actually get people to empathize and feel the same emotions you're feeling, but that can be very difficult to do as well.
You know, if you never walk away with like remembering any of these structures or formulas or tips or tricks, you just know yourself when you're telling a good or shit story. You know, you know by the way someone's looking back at. Well, I actually that's a lie. Sometimes I really don't, and I just keep digging my heels into whatever story I'm telling. But you know, you kind of get a gist of it yourself. You know, when you're knee deep in a story and people are around, you're like, and then what? What happened next? You know, you can feel the buzz off a story. Whereas if you're sitting there and everyone's like, oh, someone picks up their phone and, you know, you just know yourself.
We've all got that friend that you're like, can you just speed it up? Get to the end, get to the end.
Yeah.
The
Can I put you on-
1.5 on WhatsApp.
Yeah. Can I put you on 2x, please?
Yeah, 2x. But as well, just to go back to the story, it's like there's 7 basic storylines for every film. Like if you think about that narratively, there's 7 different. I have them here. There's 7 of them. So it's like overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage return, comedy, tragedy, rebirth. They're basically the 7 storylines of every film.
And like the Young Offenders was Voyage Return. I remember like at that time being really into this stuff and being like, wow, it follows all of those steps in there.
100%, even overcoming the monster, like Devil Wears Prada.
Yeah.
All these storylines have these, like even if you want to apply them to your business, it could be overcoming that, like a massive, whatever, a big speed bump. Overcoming the monsters, that like the Voyage Return is you going to China to pick out your latest products to come back, like all this kind of stuff. Like, do you mean you can just apply that stuff to your business? It'd be cool. Like,
do you know who's what's very, very good at the setup? And I know, Jay, we've talked about him before because we both really enjoy the show, is Always Sunny in Philly. Have you either of you watched that show?
Love that show, yeah.
Sian, it's actually right up your alley.
I know, and I keep meaning to because it's your man from Wrexham, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's in it, yeah.
He created it, yeah.
But the way they long story short, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, every single episode is about something fairly controversial, but they set it up in what feels like a seemingly harmless way. You know, they kind of fall into the trap of the very kind of controversial topic, and it kind of pans out that way. But the setups are absolutely excellent in that format, where it's like it's almost like, oh, I tripped and fell into controversy, and we're just so naive and pulling our way back out. And that setup is genius. It's what I always think about when I'm watching it. I'm like, the way they have set this up is so good. So many brands could learn so much more from them, because you can't help but like them because of the way it's been set up, even though they have dove into something controversial and they still come out on the right side of it, which is really interesting, because if you can structure stories almost like how they do for your business, that's a different kind of game changer again altogether.
My favorite TV show of all time.
It's so good.
It is.
What
really
is it on? Netflix or something?
Netflix.
It's on Netflix, yeah. It's just like, how many seasons? There must be at least
There's,
12 seasons.
No, it's 15 seasons, going to 16 seasons
16
now.
seasons,
But they're
yeah.
20-minute episodes. They're perfect.
Danny DeVito's in it as well.
Yeah. Highly recommend. And that's the first time I've ever heard someone say, oh, that's the Wrexham guy, instead of saying that's the Always Sunny guy doing
me
Wrexham.
too.
Oh, really? Yeah, I'm obsessed with Wrexham, so I only know him from that.
He's a great storyteller. Like,
Yeah, phenomenal.
Well,
So-
Wrexham's a fine example of that, actually.
I haven't seen it. What is it, Jen?
Wrexham, himself,
welcome to Wrexham, isn't it?
and
Ryan
Ryan
Reynolds.
Reynolds.
Ryan Reynolds bought an old Welsh rugby club, a football club, pardon me, soccer, and they've transformed not just the football club but the actual place itself. Invested a lot of money in the area, and it's the story of how they take the football club and the community up the leagues, and it is phenomenal.
It's a docu-series on Prime. Is it Prime?
Disney.
It's on Disney.
Yeah, it's well worth the watch.
It's
cool.
amazing.
Even if you're not a soccer fan, it's well worth the watch.
Oh, I hate soccer,
Yeah,
and
I do
I'm
too.
obsessed.
Is it like Ted Lasso?
So actually, a Ted Lasso is like the fictional version of Wrexham.
Cool.
Ted Lasso came out obviously after Wrexham. I love Ted Lasso as well because I grew up in Richmond, and it is a real place, and I know all the roads.
It's actually funny, in Ted Lasso, he received a letter from Ryan and the two boys looking to get him down there.
Brilliant.
Remember the last season, he was like, no, I'm not going to Wrexham. Yeah, it's the whole thing. Like,
Yeah, it's great.
story like Ted Lasso, storytelling, phenomenal.
Oh,
Like, so good, like just proper stories. Like,
Everyone finds themselves needy. I mean, a really good example of this as well is the rise of Formula One after the docu-series on
Unbelievable.
Netflix.
Yeah.
Like, I remember I was in America some few weeks after maybe season 2, maybe it was season 2. Anyway, one of the seasons had just launched, and you could not walk down through the city without just these massive billboards of all of the Formula One guys with big watches, big, they were just plastered all over the place after it. But like, even sure, I have no interest in farming. I'm knee deep in Jeremy Clarkson's farm show on Amazon.
Yeah.
And I am like, I'm just talking to people as if I know everything about farming. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous.
But look at the John Lewis ads at Christmas.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff, it's all storytelling. People wait for that short film to come out because of obviously the legacy of it. But you have to wonder what A Boy on the Moon is doing for John Lewis's sales. But it's all brand awareness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a feeling. It's all about the feelings.
Yeah. Didn't we talk about something on TikTok, Judie? You loved it. I didn't really like it that much. It was like a pub somewhere about an old chap. If you're alone, like, again, a story. He'd probably fill that pub for months after that. Like, it's now probably a tourist destination. Like, do you know what I mean?
There's that very good football one that was going viral recently as well around men's mental health, where it was
that was brilliant
at the match, and one guy, you can just there's actually very little speaking in it at all, but your man next to him was like up and cheering, and he's just like, just nodding his head and being really solemn or whatever the case. But it just doesn't, you don't need to write a script for everything either. You can, especially if you're using video, you can just see what it is. What is it? 90% of what we say is in our body language.
But don't leave the people on a cliffhanger, Jen. Tell them what happened to the guys. Like,
oh, he's delighted. He's very happy at the end, I think.
No, he died. He killed himself.
I can't remember.
Jen.
He killed himself, Jen.
Oh my God, I didn't watch the whole video. I just thought it was very good.
The solemn guy was like kind of going hands up, cheering.
I said the guy was cheering. Help him and kept scrolling.
No, the guy who was cheering killed himself, and I was like, you can never know.
Oh,
I thought that she couldn't finish the story because it was so emotionally hard to get through it.
That's just brilliant. You're like my sister. My sister was about 14 and she walked into the kitchen and said to my mum, she was crying and she said, I can't believe that you didn't tell me that the mother died in Bambi. And my mum was like, you've watched that film 100 times. She said, but I've always fallen asleep. So she'd always missed the mum dying at the end. It's very sad. But yeah.
That's just the world of social media too, isn't it? It just kind of really dawned on me that actually I couldn't tell you the end of most things that I watch because you just never see the end of anything when you're scrolling, do you?
That's scrolling, man. It's the worst.
There's one more TED Talk that I want to bring up before I ask you for any advice that you have on storytelling, but it's Derek Thompson's The 4-Letter Code. I think it's about selling or something like that. But he talks about, what does he say again? It's like the most advanced yet acceptable. He said, like, what you were saying earlier about like lots of stories are the same. People love what they're familiar with. But there's like a sweet spot between what's familiar and what's new. And then he says that humans are drawn to new things, but then they also find comfort in the familiar. So the most successful products and services cater to both of these things. So I think that, like, this is my teach me something new. When you're coming up with your stories, like, don't be afraid of it to follow the same structures as other stories or to kind of contain the same lessons and stuff. You're new, you're unique, and like that's what we were saying earlier. Like your business is unique, so let that, and then try to find other ways to make it novel, like how you lean in. But from you guys' perspective, Jay, can you give me any tips for storytelling or other businesses?
Yeah, like Pocahontas, Last Samurai, Avatar, and Dance with Wolves, they're all the exact same story. And they're all Oscar winners. Do you know what I mean? It's all, people love the stories they used to. Like, it's just, like overcoming this whole thing about the fighting for one side, realizing he's fighting the wrong side and coming back then and fighting for the right side kind of thing. So what I actually do is when I look at production companies in the States, Australia, everywhere, I try and see how they're telling their story. Is it something new? Is it something I can steal? Is it something I can apply to my business? I'm always doing that. So if you're in that niche, and I know people say, don't look at competition, don't look at competition, but I think it's interesting to see how the competition are telling their story. Don't look their marketing tactics, that's all fine, but see how they're telling their story. What are the different ways they're telling the story? I like having a cup of tea and doing deep dives on other people's branding and storytelling and seeing if I can apply it to a client. Like if I can say that was very cool, show it to a client, do you like this? Because we could do something like this, but with our twist on it, or apply it to my own business as well. I just think the more it's like anything, the more you read, the more you see, the more you write, like all this stuff is the better, because then you can kind of affiliate it to other things. So I would say do a good bit of research and yeah.
Great. Jen?
I would say watch a story to the end so you don't put your foot in it. First and foremost. I think one thing that people don't think about a huge amount is like future proofing a story. I mean, there's a very good book called The Secret History of Brands where you can reflect back on some of the biggest brands of the day and you can look at how their story is actually deeply controversial. Those kind of future proofing is kind of critical in a way, but also something you can't really predict. I mean, a lot of people, when we would have been back watching Friends in the late 90s, early 2000s, we would have thought it was very progressive. And now a lot of people think that didn't age very well. And, it's like even, back years ago, I remember even I did my undergraduate degree in government and politics, and we looked at, different politicians that were kicked out in the US of different parties over the years because they had signed up to be part of the Communist Party in university. But that was before communism was a bad thing, or perceived as a bad thing in the US at least. So there's all of these things you have to kind of factor in a little bit at least, that you can't predict everything, but future proof yourself a little bit at least.
Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. God. And isn't it interesting how like the zeitgeist or the like things change and you think that you're doing something positive and then 10 years later it's like, like, yeah. Sian, what would you give any advice for businesses?
I would say definitely like Google that breakdown of the Pixar, tell your story. If you feel that your story isn't exciting enough or fluffy enough, please take advice and ask for help, because you'd be surprised actually what somebody else can bring out of you. I think when it comes to story as well, trademarking, it can protect you there, your storytelling. And actually a really good example is Irish Diesel, because Diesel is a big company worldwide. There is also a Diesel in Ireland, and Diesel tried to close that Irish Diesel down, but actually in their story and their history and everything else, they had no rights on that trademark. So making sure that you really understand the whens, the whys and the hows and where you got to today is super, super important for lots of different elements. But yeah, I would say, please ask for help if you feel that you can't get that story across properly.
Do you know what? Just to piggyback on what Sian said there's a very interesting case study of how McDonald's tried to sue the Irish Supermax. They went for Supermax and another crowd called McDonald's.
Oh yeah. McDonald's, ELLS.
ELLS as well. But yeah, it's we seem to have a good history of fighting back on the copyright marks from bigger companies.
And successfully winning.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, that wraps up today's episode on storytelling for businesses. And we hope that you found that relevant and informative for your business. Please follow us, like us and subscribe to us on all of the channels. And we will see you next week for episode 36.
Doses.
Thanks, guys. Bye.